Metal by P.E. Rowe. A few hours after the Yankee Chaos had touched down on Theta Nicorla, Bulldog Hernan pinged the ship, wondering where Carolina and the crew were. It was late afternoon local time, and he'd gathered his family at his homestead to welcome them for Saturday dinner. This was not a small gesture for an Ateran to make, especially in light of the circumstances. The Letters Offensive was threatening most of the inner lettered systems. Acop Hernan had just returned to his family, and Carolina and crew had only recently been his captors, having abducted him from Alpha Petros right before the fighting broke out. Transom was trying to explain how significant a gesture it was for Bulldog to invite them to his family's table. "It's a big deal for Aterans, Carolina," Sebastian said. "At least those of us with families. We can't ever rely on having set holidays being safe to celebrate, so we honor the people fighting if we can each week. People on Edoras take it pretty seriously."
"Should we bring a gift?"
Carolina asked. "I'd ask Fieldstone. I don't exactly get invited to a lot of dinners," he said, grinning. "I'm more the one out in the field making sure it's safe to break bread, not the one you break bread with."
"You cleaned up okay enough on Athos," she replied.
"Well, we just don't want to be late. That's kind of an insult." The ship was parked out in the flats, a good 2 kilometers from the outer edge of the city of Nicorla, where Acop Hernan's home was. Carolina didn't like the idea of the whole crew vacating the vessel, especially with a walk of that length. In Theta Nicorla's non-breathable atmosphere, it meant a belt and a nanosheet for everyone, and with the offensive being in full swing, having the crew so far from the ship, exposed on the flat while they dined at Hernan's house, Carolina insisted on the crew taking precautions. She ordered Soch, Transom, and Fieldstone to go combat-ready, and for Wren to pack her go-bag. Additionally, she switched on Harold to lug a generator and modular life support unit, as 2 kilometers was a long walk without a suit and helmet. "Hernan can juice us at his house," Fieldstone argued. "You don't bring bots in combat gear to Saturday dinner. This is more of an insult than being late, Captain. Putting the weapons down and eating together with people is kind of the point. A show of faith."
"All the same,"
she insisted.
"we're at war, and we're exposed out here."
"Yeah, Captain. Bulldog understands that too. That's the insult. Showing up in heavy gear sort of undercuts his decision that it's safe enough to have the dinner in the first place."
"I didn't realize how sensitive you Aterans were. If there's an issue, you can blame it on your Athosian captain, Fieldstone. These are my orders."
So they left the ship empty, out on the flats, save for the Mycon clone watching its systems, sensors, and local networks he was monitoring for activity. They marched along the flat single file, 7 strong, equipped for combat, and to the untrained eyes there on Theta Nicorla, they'd have looked like a serious unit. Transom on point, followed by Soch, Carolina, Drya, and Fieldstone, Wren and Harold taking up the rear, laden with heavy gear. "You look like a combat unit," Bulldog remarked when they arrived at the outer archway to his estate's nanosheet.
"My orders,"
Carolina insisted.
"in light of the offensive."
There was a long pause before Bulldog replied. "Very well, Captain Dreesen. 2 at a time through the lock, please. It's a residential shield." They let down their nanosheets as they walked up toward Hernan's front entrance. There was an expansive porch with a sun shield that wrapped around the home, which was composed from several modular airlock-grade units welded together in case the outer nanosheet failed. There was a phalanx of young trees inside the lock, seemingly guarding the perimeter of the property. These were significantly larger than the engineered saplings outside the shield, breathing the local atmosphere. Theta Nicorla looked a harsh place to Carolina's eyes, its obscurity seemingly its most desirable quality. The drawback to that quality, though, she could feel in her bones out there, exposed like that, was that the planet's obscurity was their only protection. A colony so small was in no position to mount a defense against even the smallest Trasp aggression. Bulldog himself met them on the porch. "Leave your weapons outside, please," he instructed. "I invited you to Saturday dinner." "Sorry, boss," Transom stated. We don't get invited to a lot of these. No doubt, Hernan stated. You can leave your Harold outside as well. Hernan greeted everyone at the door as they entered, with Carolina stepping in last.
My orders, she stated. I meant no offense.
Of course not, Bulldog answered. Better to be prepared than polite. I welcome a wise young commander to my home. The modular appearance to the outside of the home belied the spaciousness and comfort of the interior. Inside, in addition to the crew of 6 from the Yankee Chaos, Mycon Prime was already at home among 17 Aterans, mostly children, who all came into the front room to greet the guests. Bulldog handled formal introductions to his family, starting with his oldest daughter, Carval, followed by Liuma and Medjua, the wife of Akop Hernan's youngest son. The oldest child in the group was 14, while Liuma and Medjua had babies, a boy and girl, born 3 weeks apart, who were weeks away from taking their first steps.
You have a lovely family and a lovely home here, Carolina said, after she introduced the crew. We're grateful you invited us to share it with you today. We're grateful to you for bringing our father back to us,
Carval replied.
It's so rare we get a chance to all be together.
Yes, Bulldog said. Please, everyone. Do make yourselves at home until we sit for the meal. In addition to the many human hands working to make the guests feel welcome, Bulldog had several housebots serving drinks and preparing Saturday dinner. Carolina couldn't remember when the crew had been off the Yankee Chaos together like this, relaxing. Months, certainly. While the crew got to know the family, most of the kids went outside and began playing games in the yard, enclosed by the nanosheet. Bulldog confessed that this had been his lifelong dream, to get his family safe to a place they could grow together, outside the direct shadow of the war, even if its existence still loomed over their future. He explained that the fathers and several siblings were on deployment somewhere in the war effort, as most of the children understood was their fate as soon as they came of age. There would be no shirking of that duty, even if their family was hiding out in the letters. After a couple hours of drinks and conversation, Bulldog called the gathering to the main room for the meal. Modest by Athosian standards, an Ateran Saturday dinner usually offered the week's best to the visiting guests, when there were some. There was always an invocation bringing to mind the absent warriors fighting for the security of those gathering, and a moment of praise and gratitude to the fallen. Bulldog added a valediction to the guests for bringing the family together. Reminds me of my youth, Fieldstone remarked after they began eating. On the rare occasions my father was home.
On Edoras?
Bulldog's younger daughter Liuma asked. Fieldstone confirmed as much with a nod as his mouth was full.
We visited Edoras with father several times,
Liuma replied, a tone of nostalgia evident to Carolina.
Were you not raised there as well?
The question seemed to surprise the Aterans at the table.
Father is Taman, of course,
Liuma replied.
Where are you from, Captain? Father didn't say.
He didn't say for good reason, Bulldog interrupted. Our visiting captain is from the inner battery, love. She's unfamiliar with our ways.
I guess we think of all Aterans as being from Edoras, Carolina replied. It's easy for us outsiders to forget the rest of the guild. Tamos is rather forgettable,
Medjua, the daughter-in-law, joked.
It's a forgivable oversight.
That jibe at the Hernan's homeworld set off a round of friendly joking about the virtues and drawbacks of Tamos versus the cylinders. Medjua, having grown up in the pan-cylinder group, had heard all their jokes about the neighbor's floor being her sky.
Where did you grow up, Sebastian?
Carval, the eldest daughter, asked Transom. Draxus, he replied. The answer brought the table nearly to silence, almost as though he'd uttered some unmentionable taboo topic. After a second or two of awkward silence, Soch looked over at Transom and said, Must be a real cheerful place, drawing an audible gasp from Akop Hernan's 2 daughters. Eyes got wide around the table. Transom let out a deep, long, loud laugh. Ah, metal face, yeah. There's an honest debate among us survivors about whether or not the Trasp improved the place when they nuked it. I'm still on the fence. Hiernan's family didn't quite know how to react until Bulldog himself began to laugh. The little dark humor girls. A necessary evil in Sebastian's line of work, I'm afraid. Can't take him anywhere, Fieldstone stated, shaking his head.
He's useful to have around when you need him, though, Carolina said to the Hernan girls.
Speaking of which, Mycon Prime interrupted, approaching the table. I need to borrow Sebastian for a few moments.
Something I should know? Carolina asked.
Mycon didn't verbalize his response, nodding his head toward the table, as though to leave the question open.
I'll join you, she stated. Please excuse us, everyone.
The three of them stepped outside onto Hiernan's front porch.
You're even a hit among your own people,
Carolina said to Transom. Just one of my many talents. Yes, Mycon said. Regarding those talents, my counterpart and I would like your expertise on this. He projected a small float screen from a band in his right wrist. From the ship's passive sweep? Transom asked, examining the screen closely. He stared at the readout, shaking his head. Multiple disturbances. Maybe some symmetry there.
What is it?
Carolina asked. I need a look at this, Transom said. Possible contacts. The readings showed potential imbalances in the upper atmosphere, though it was difficult to tell with the Yankee Chaos parked out on the plain at ground level. Transom had the ship fire off a high-altitude fly drone that would take a couple minutes to deploy and spit back readings.
Guests?
Carolina asked. Let's hope not, Transom said. I was just starting to have a good time in there. They donned eyewear to view the readouts and put up their nanosheets. Transom took them up a slight incline, just outside Hiernan's property. He wanted a clear line of sight to the ship. By the time they'd climbed the small, rounded crest of the hill, the fly drone was up and spitting back readings, telemetry, Mycon's interpretation insets, and visuals. Well, shit, Transom stated. Though Carolina was looking at the same screen, she missed the significance of it.
What?
Metal, was all he said, as though the meaning of it should be obvious to Carolina.
In plain language, please, Sebastian?
Petros wasn't an accident, I don't think. The Trask must have been on Hiernan. Maybe his family. They're here anyway, and we are properly pinned down.
The Trask are here. Now?
In 3 or 4 minutes, sure, he answered.
You don't seem overly bothered by that fact, Sebastian.
Pants shitting never once improved the situation, boss. Plus, I got a sense the old dog's got some contingencies here we don't know about, Transom said, gesturing for Carolina to follow him back down the hill. Let's get inside before they get line of sight on the city.
The ship, Carolina said.
Nah, boss. They'd hit it with LRMs if the YC so much as warmed its engines right now. Best leave it grounded.
And fight them?
Transom was jogging down the hill effortlessly at a clip that challenged Carolina. No one fights metal unless they have a death wish, boss. Let's go see about that contingency first. A warfighter like ACOP Hiernan never retires completely. The instincts don't ever fully recede. And Bulldog hadn't been retired this time for a full day yet. As much as he seemed at ease here on Theta Nicorla among his family, he knew what Transom and Carolina's departure meant. Bulldog could read the looks on their faces when they returned well enough that he hardly needed to hear the words. Shame and echo, he declared to his family and housebots. The table was abandoned calmly, the mothers each attending to their group at the end of the table, which was well ordered, and the children knew what the words meant and fell in by age, disappearing from the room in a matter of seconds, the eldest ushering the youngest and the middle children taking account of each other. Too far out to get back to your ship? Bulldog asked Transom. We're pinned. Meat or metal? Metal, Transom answered. Let this be a lesson in command, Ms. Dreesen, Bulldog Hiernan said. Fortunately, a positive reinforcement. You'll never regret being prepared today. You're welcome to grab your gear and follow us. Unless you'd like to stay and find out what sort of orders the drones and strike bots have.
Fetch Harold and the gear and fall in, everyone, Carolina stated. Sorry, Bulldog. This seemed like a nice place your family had here.
We didn't choose it for the ambiance, Carolina. Walk with me. Bulldog eyed Fieldstone, who was standing at the front door, eyes on the old Ateran war chief, who snapped his fingers and summoned a floater, a small glowing ball drone, for the guests to follow to the lower level when they were ready. Then he left with Carolina and Transom walking directly behind him. "Time?" Bulldog asked. 2 minutes, maybe, now," Transom answered. "Well enough," Bulldog said. "Hope you've got good shoes on, Ms. Dreesen." He ushered them down a back hallway to a set of stairs leading to a basement level. And there, in the corner, one of the Hiernan's housebots stood at a yawning square hole in the floor with a steep metal staircase. The room at the bottom of that metal staircase was a square box carved out of the bedrock, with another open hatch at the bottom of it. There was a second ladder down the hatch that descended to a tunnel. Carolina and Transom waited as Bulldog slowly made his way down. He didn't seem to rush. "These old legs have had their share of exercise today," he said, as he waited for them at the bottom of the second ladder. Down the hallway, Carolina could hear footsteps and hushed voices. "All down?" Bulldog barked down the corridor.
4,
Carval replied.
6,
Liuma followed.
3,
Medua stated, at which point Bulldog nodded. "All yours, then, daughter," he said, giving the command to Carval to lead the family down to the lower lock. "Sealed?" he asked her.
"Not yet, Father,"
Carval answered. "Very good, I have it." Carolina waited quietly beside Bulldog, who only began to follow his daughters and the children when he saw the glow of the ball drone at the top of the ladder in the upper room. Carolina could hear the weight of Sosha's metal leg descending. Down the dark, narrow corridor, there was another ladder in a tube-like tunnel that led down to another square room. "Hold here," Bulldog stated when they reached the bottom of the ladder.
"Scanning for trackers?"
Carolina asked. "I doubt they followed your ship," Bulldog stated. "Otherwise they'd have visited us sometime between Alpha Petros and our arrival here, Ms. Dreesen. So either the Trasp tracked someone in my family, or they had some human intelligence placing me here. Theta Nakorla is too far out to be of any strategic value in this offensive. That's one of the reasons I chose it."
"One of the reasons?"
Carolina asked. "The lava tubes under the city," Hiernan answered. "If you think my family sets roots anywhere without a safe way out, well, you'd think wrong." "Like I said, boss," Transom stated. "Contingencies." A light popped up on Bulldog's eyepiece in the darkness. "Clear to proceed, Captain Dreesen," Hiernan stated, gesturing toward the lower ladder. "Raise your nanosheets and follow Carval's instruction when you get down. I'll clear your group and shut the doors behind us." As she descended the ladder into near total darkness, Carolina had expected to be met by the lights of other citizens of Theta Nakorla taking refuge in the lava tubes. It seemed an excellent place to hide, providing the Trasp force didn't discover the tunnels leading down to them. Instead, though, they were met only by the hushed quiet of Bulldog Hiernan's well-trained family and the dull-colored lights of their eyewear, at head height for the adults, with the children's lights closer to the floor. In descending order down the tunnel, closest to them, red, was Carval and her children. Next, Liuma, a dull blue, and further down, Medua and her children, piercing the wall of darkness with 4 pinpoints of dim green. It occurred then to Carolina that no one else on Theta Nakorla would have prepared for such a strike. A Trasp attack out here, until the start of the offensive, would have been the remotest possibility. Only Bulldog himself and his family could have anticipated the motive for such a distant incursion.
"We have a ship at the exit point," Carval explained to Carolina and Transom. "It will be a challenging walk, though. We should strive to be as quiet and light on our feet as possible. Sound travels quite well through these tunnels." "Very good,"
Carolina whispered back. When the rest of the Yankee Chaos crew descended, Carval arranged them in single file, with the exception of Harold, whom she placed between Liuma and Medua's families to space out the power and life support charging stations, 2 of which were already on hand with the Hiernan housebots, who'd descended first. Bulldog Hiernan came down last with Fieldstone and Drya. He was sporting a sleek exoskeleton, which he'd had stashed in the lower level beneath the scanner, along with a gear pack. The floating ball drone hovered down with them as well.
"This is cozy,"
Ren said at a volume she thought was quiet enough to be audible only to Soch and Carolina beside her. But as she heard her voice echoing down the lava tube, she followed the comment with a whispered,
"Sorry."
"Very good, Doctor," Bulldog stated. "Comforting to know you're with us. Wit, wisdom, and a surgeon's skilled hands are never a liability." He was, as he mentioned before, in the process of closing the doors behind them. In this case, that meant flooding the square annex rooms beneath the basement of each house with a composite liquid that hardened in seconds to a polymer as rigid as the volcanic stone around it. He did the same with the room directly above, where they'd all just scanned clear for any tracking mechanisms. "You been through here before?" Fieldstone asked Bulldog. "Are you crazy, Major? Of course not. We sent floaters through to scan the route." "How far's the exit point?" 40 clicks down that way," Kiernan answered, gesturing into the darkness. "It'll be a tough walk. Hope you all can keep up with my girls. But we couldn't very well leave you for the Trasp to interrogate now, could we?"
"We're grateful for that,"
Carolina said. "We'll find out if that's true in 20 kilometers of spelunking, I'd wager," Kiernan stated. "We'd better get moving. Carval's on point. Quietly and carefully now." As the group moved through the network of lava tubes, it became immediately apparent to Carolina that the character of her people was entirely different to these Aterans. She did her best to contrast it against what she perceived to be an ordinary Athosian childhood, which was significantly different from her own, and didn't remotely resemble the life of these Hirnan children. Even in exile, as they'd been raised, the Hirnans were disciplined and task-focused. The elder children, shepherding the attention and bodies of the younger down each tunnel toward the next turning point. At difficult squeezes, steps, climbs, or turns, Carval stationed a bot, or the right human helper, who took the task with grace, leadership, and certainty. Already her feet hurt, and Carolina recognized that she did, as it happened, have pretty good shoes on. She marveled at the transformation in Akop Hirnan, who morphed from a frail old man to a deft-footed dancer along those jagged volcanic corridors in his exoskeleton. Even though it only lifted him a few centimeters, he seemed 10 centimeters taller at least, not directing the progression of his family and guests himself, but watching his daughters and grandchildren bring order to that progression. Carolina wasn't a Hirnan, but she was proud of them, marveling at them, really. "Best part of our culture," Transom stated after Carolina remarked to him on the Hirnan children. "It's necessity. When the war ends, if we make it, we'll be as soft as you Athosians in 2 generations again. Humans are purpose-driven creatures. When the purpose is existential, we grow sharp edges. When it's not, we get soft."
"I can't imagine a soft Ateran."
"That's because you've never met one."
"Have you?"
"Negative," Transom answered. "Not relative to an Athosian, anyway. Think of it this way, though, boss. Imagine if your father needed to put his mind toward the preservation of the entire Athosian people through war. The state, the infrastructure, the economy, everything. If he put his entire focus into that, Athos would change. And if the circumstances warranted the changes in the minds of the people, Athos would get hard fast. It's human nature." Still, it was a marvel to Carolina, even in the dark, or perhaps even more so. When they broke for water, Carolina whispered a conversation with one of Liuma's girls, who, to Carolina's eyes, couldn't have been older than 6.
"What do you think of this place?" Carolina asked the girl, whose name was Peastly. "I don't like the dark,"
Peastly whispered back.
"It's very scary." "You're doing a good job. How are you being so brave?" "I follow Jess's light. He always goes the right way, because Mama is following Aunt Carval."
"He's doing a good job, too."
"Mm-hmm,"
Peastly replied.
"Sometimes he holds my hand."
While they were seated, Mycon Prime called Bulldog, Carolina, Transom, and Fieldstone together. Bulldog sent for Carval to join them. "An update from the surface," Mycon stated. "We'd have heard, no doubt, if the Trasp had nuked the settlement, which is good news for the ordinary settlers on Theta Nicorla. Not great news for us. My counterpart is relaying progress as the bots make their way through the city methodically. They are zeroing in on your compound, Chief Hernan. Doubtless, they'll have it identified shortly, and eventually, they'll connect it to our ship. Similarly, I have little doubt they'll surmise that we must have fled somewhere on the planet, as the Yankee Chaos is still parked up there. Given the porous nature of the planet's outer crust, they will certainly begin to search for us underground. Best of luck to them, Akop Hernan said. We mapped these tunnels. Odds are not in their favor. Assuming that is correct, Mycon replied, then the question is how long they dare to remain on the planet, this far from any support from other Trasp forces. This offensive cannot last long at its current intensity, but if they're still there when we get to the other side of this trek, how long can we hold out? We hold out as long as we need to, Fieldstone said, or as long as we do. Very well, Mycon said. My counterpart is updating me. From his observations, there does appear to be a human leadership contingent, if that means anything specific. It means the same as you said, Transom stated, that they're looking for something specific. A specific bulldog, to be specific, instead of nuking the place outright. Bulldog sighed. Something troubling you, old man? Fieldstone asked. A disappointment, he said. Carolina and I spoke about this, how the Ateran High Command might finally let me escape the war. I guess the Trasp don't feel the same. And I suppose, if I were them, I'd see me as a high-value target as well.
We all understand, Father, Carval said, placing her hand on Bulldog's arm.
We got half a dinner, darling, didn't we?
Far more,
Carval replied.
And far more yet to come. We're all prepared.
Then let's carry on, Bulldog stated. When you're ready, daughter. The group made good progress into the lava tubes, which were labyrinthine and tight near the Hernan estate. But as they moved deeper into the network, each turn seemed to move them into a larger tunnel with deeper echoes and longer stretches of walkable floors. Even so, the going was not easy. Much of the journey was more a scramble than a walk, with each stumble representing a threat to serious bodily injury. The walls and floor were composed of sharp, jagged volcanic rock, and sometimes even glass that could cut open the toughest of clothing, which meant it would certainly break the skin beneath. In the first several hours, mostly there were scrapes and abrasions. Again, mostly on the hands of the travelers as they reached for the walls to break a stumble before it became a fall. At times, in tight quarters or on climbs, the sharp rocks cut through gloves to hands, and Wren was called to open her bag and attend to a minor wound. The group walked for nearly 6 hours, making almost 10 of the 40 kilometers before their progress was flagged by repeated stops for water, a power recharge on the bots, or by a refresh to the atmospherics within the human walker's nanosheets. It was nearing the end of the day. You didn't come prepared to camp, Akop Hernan stated, more than asked to Carolina.
No,
she said.
You did?
We have hammocks for the children, yes. It's about time to deploy them.
We'll make do,
Carolina declared.
Let us know if we can help.
The Hernans ran a line along the rocks, fixing one end of their hammock barracks to the cavern wall, while running a second end line down the middle of the tunnel, supported by their 2 housebots, who balanced that end line on supports, pulling it taut against their bodies in perfect counterweight. Then, the children settled in. We'll have an early start, Bulldog declared. Get your rest, everyone. Carolina curled up in a large natural bowl along the side of the tunnel wall, with her overshirt for a pillow. None of the adults got much rest. After the party rose in the morning, Mycon called the leaders together to relay that during the night, contact to his clone in the ship was suddenly cut off.
What does that mean?
Carolina asked. Nothing definitive, Mycon replied. One of several scenarios is possible. He could have sequestered himself elsewhere to avoid being detected if the Trasp boarded the vessel. The Trasp may have destroyed the ship outright, and therefore my clone with it. Or he may have chosen to self-terminate rather than be subjected to a programmatic interrogation. The Trasp do know my model well.
What do you think is most likely?
Any of the above, Captain. The one certainty is that we will no longer have input on the situation on Theta Nicorla's surface. Not until we power up my ship on the other side, Bulldog declared. The vessel is well hidden in a lava tube, but we can sneak a bird up to get a look to see when it's safe for us to fly.
So we press on,
Carolina said.
Behind you, Carval.
The group made excellent progress on that second day, closing 14 clicks by mid-afternoon and another 7 by that evening. Then, the leaders gathered to debate stopping for another night of rest. Ultimately, Wren interrupted, giving the final word.
People fall when they're tired, and we are all tired, especially the little ones. Sound thinking, Carval echoed. The survey has the route growing more difficult again as we near the surface once more, Doctor. We should be prepared for the final stretch.
During the night, sleepless as they were, Carolina and Bulldog sat together, their backs perched on packs against the wall as they sat on the flattest part of the floor they could find.
I'm not a military tactician by any interpretation, Carolina said, but if the Trasp were after me, I know I wouldn't want my family beside me, Bulldog.
The old man sighed.
What are you going to do?
We have contingencies, he stated. Of course. I suppose the answer to that question depends on what awaits us when we pop up again. If the Trasp have left the colony, we may be able to strategize a little differently. It may be that the letters is the wrong place for us. Certainly the girls and the children anyway. We'd have to go a long way to find a city that would take me back your way, Carolina.
Unfortunately, I wouldn't recommend Athos or Helenia.
I wouldn't take the recommendation if you gave it, Bulldog said. I have thoughts, so we shall see. If the war is not done with me yet, so be it. I've known no other life. Perhaps I'd be unsuited for a peaceful retirement anyway. What about you, though? I know you won't share your newfound understanding, my dear, who's responsible for this mess. But you have a course of action at least? Carolina herself sighed.
I doubt the war is bound to let any of us go, Bulldog. Maybe the children. Maybe we can achieve that in our lifetimes.
Your lifetime?
I do hope.
I said the same once to your grandmother, Miss Dreesen. Circumstances notwithstanding, of course. It does bring me some measure of joy to see you here meeting my grandchildren. A generational friendship between our families, renewed in the most peculiar of ways.
All the plans you and grandmother made, how many of them came to pass?
Once, Carolina. We both slipped our security details and met for lunch in Port Cullen. I do believe that was the only time we were ever free to speak in anything but allusions and inferences. That plan came to pass. I remember thinking how remarkably similar our perspectives were, despite the astounding cultural differences. And here we are, all over again. Carolina and the crew of the Yankee Chaos were far enough behind Hosman when he fell that the cry seemed like an echo of a howl, rather than the scream in the darkness that it was. He was Medua's second son, the 5-year-old. He was just out of reach of one of the houseboats when he tripped and tumbled down 4 meters to a pinch point in between 2 narrowing rock walls, a hole so small the adults missed it, and were it not for the quick action of the 2 houseboats, who immediately crawled in after him head first, as well as Mycon Prime pulling the mass out, anchored by Soch to the wall above, the boy may have suffocated in that narrow pit before the humans could reach him. As it stood when he came out, the boy was in poor shape, yet to Carolina's eyes there was no panic, as Carval and the Yuma escorted the other children quietly away from the scene, while the YC crew awaited orders from Wren as she assessed the boy's injuries, calling for light and support. She would need a rock at chest height to set her table, as she couldn't operate on her knees, not on volcanic rock. Hosman's arm had snapped in half cleanly at the upper head of the humerus when the limb got pinned back behind him in the fall. Keep the bots with you to move the boy, Transom stated to Wren. Fields and I will scout the tunnel. The two Ateran commandos took off in opposite directions, looking for a rock surface they could use as a support to set the doctor's table. Fields returned first, having inspected a bowl-like projection that was noted earlier as they passed. It was the right height, and the rim was level enough to work with. Meanwhile, Wren had cleared Hosman's spine, but her initial scan left her concerned about subdural bleeding around the temporal lobe of the boy's brain.
"How far's the walk?"
she asked Fields. 5 minutes, he answered.
"You and Soch set up the room, and we'll be up behind you shortly."
Wren had the two housebots carry Hosman on the fabric litter, while Mycon brought a generator and the 2 atmospheric purifiers. The litter was a battery-powered sheet Wren carried folded up in her go-bag that stiffened to a flat board when charged, making for an excellent stretcher she could double out to table width when she was ready to operate. As they were moving him, the boy began to regain consciousness, howling in the silence, sending a shudder along the party that had stretched out to several hundred meters along that narrow tunnel. Carolina joined Hernan's daughters and the children further down the tunnel, leaving Wren and Mycon Prime, as there were more than enough hands in her makeshift operating theater. Hosman's older brother was not taking the situation with typical Ateran stoicism, which Carolina found totally understandable for a 7-year-old.
"Hosman was my responsibility,"
he cried.
"I should have seen." "All of us missed it too," his Aunt Leuma reassured him. "I should have seen. Hosman is always falling. He's always unlucky."
"Not today, he's not," Sebastian stated. He was standing just outside the dull glow of the group's light, but he was always close enough that, seen or unseen, he was within reach of Carolina, who was seated beside the children. The kids looked up into the darkness, toward Sebastian's deep voice. "You kids want to know something?" Transom asked, stepping toward them.
"What?"
Carval's eldest boy asked. "I got blown up once. Real bad. Busted bones. Blood everywhere. Metal pieces sticking in me all over. Out in the desert, too. So I was all dust and blood and mud and dirt when they found me. But you look at me now, you'd never know it, would you?"
"No,"
a few of the kids said simultaneously. "That's because Dr. Wren, the lady back there taking care of your brother, she patched me back together good as new. Better even. So the way I see it, Hosman's the luckiest kid I ever met. Not too many people lucky enough to take a fall like that, right in front of the best surgeon in the battery. Does that sound unlucky to you?"
"She's a really good doctor?"
one of Carval's girls asked. "I wouldn't be here talking to you if she wasn't," Transom said.
"Before you came to dinner, Grandfather said that you and Major Fieldstone were real war fighters. The toughest fighters we have," one of the boys stated.
"That's right," Transom said.
"So you must know."
"Yeah, we've both got blown up and shot up a few times. We know what it's like to get banged up bad. And it'd take a lot more than that little fall back there to challenge Dr. Wren, that's certain."
"That's good,"
Hosman's brother stated.
"I'm glad you're all with us, Major."
Hosman's fall brought a halt to the party's progress for the day. Wren was quickly able to screw the boy's shoulder back together, with Mycon's assistance. She was far more concerned with the head injury, though. To Transom's point, she carried a heavier go-bag than most military surgeons. Even most good practitioners of field medicine probably wouldn't have been prepared to do better than a few micropores to relieve the pressure in the skull. Wren had dealt with enough head trauma to understand how crucial it was to keep pressure from forming, if it could be avoided. So she always carried several syringes of ocyte, a nanotech fluid that burrowed tens of thousands of pores through the skull, allowing any excess fluid to seep away before pressure could build up and cause damage to the brain. She was also monitoring the boy's cervical spine for some very minor signs of bruising she saw on the scans. The impact had been a serious one, but several hours after she'd begun treating Hosman, Wren told Medjua she expected her son to make a full recovery in a matter of weeks. That prognosis was affirmed a few hours later when Hosman regained consciousness and showed no signs of permanent impairment, More than anything, he was antsy to get moving again. Bulldog sent Fieldstone ahead with one of the housebots to prep the ship. He wanted what passive readings they could gather on the Trasp force if they were still up on the planet. Then they agreed to settle where they were for the night and catch up with Fieldstone the following day. The party arrived at the base of the exit shaft shortly before noon the next morning. The Hirnan's bug-out ship was a civilian cruiser about half the size of the Yankee Chaos. It was tucked neatly behind a camouflage tarp nearly 100 meters deep in the lava tube. Short of a drone making a run down the shaft, the Trasp weren't going to get readings on it unless the group properly powered up the ship for takeoff. As it stood, Fieldstone had been taking readings on passive comm signals as best he could from that position. The news was not good. Their hope had been that after nearly 3 full days of searching with no sign of their target, the Trasp would have abandoned Nikorla. The opposite seemed to be the case. There were so many enemy signals, Fieldstone didn't even think it was worth the risk to send up a bird or a fly to get a better look. That would only run the risk of their drone helping the Trasp to pinpoint its origin. Their best hope was to rely on the porousness of the planet's surface, the thousands of similar volcanic shafts surrounding the city of Nikorla, and the hope that frustration would set in.
Can we fly away now?
One of the older children asked Bulldog. Not yet, he replied. The enemy has ships in orbit, drones, missiles, many weapons.
How are we going to get away then, Grandpa?
We've come this far and have eluded them still, he answered. We'll find our way. Patience. Hosman and the younger children spent the afternoon in the ship, contained enough within to play games and breathe freely outside the constriction of their atmospheric belts once more. The leaders, meanwhile, met to discuss the reality of the situation. Based on their passive readings of Trasp comms, the enemy were doing exactly as the fugitives would were their roles reversed, methodically searching the area around the city in an orderly fashion. And based on the progress, Mycon estimated they would circle around to their location in approximately 18 hours. The question is how deep beneath the surface they are surveying with their drones, Mycon declared. Based on the numbers we observed as they approached, I strongly suspect the ship will be discovered.
Should we retreat to the tunnels?
Carolina asked. That's one option, certainly, Bulldog stated. A limited timeline on that, though. Rations, power, atmosphere. We'd be able to hold out a week, maybe. And that's presuming they don't send a strike force down into the shafts after us once they find the ship at our exit point.
And if we made a run for it?
Carolina asked. They'd pick up the engine signature and be waiting at the top of the shaft before we even got airborne, Fieldstone said. You didn't plan for this, old man? Transom asked Bulldog. For a 5-day siege? As it happens, no. Who'd have figured they'd be so bold? Or want me so badly? Frankly, it's puzzling. And nothing from your clone? Transom asked Mycon. I'd have notified you immediately. Sorry, no.
Still pinned, then,
Carolina stated. Soon, the contingencies change, Bulldog stated. If they want me this badly, they may get me. I'll be damned if they get my family. Captain Dreesen.
We'll do everything we can if it comes to it, Bulldog.
I wouldn't say we're there yet, Fieldstone stated. Maybe not, Bulldog Hirnan replied. But we're certainly at the point we should start planning for my surrender. As the hours ticked by, Mycon's analysis of the Trasp forces became increasingly pessimistic. The signals hovering over, inside, and around Nikorla painted a picture of a sizable fleet of drones, bots, and ships. This far out, even if the letters sent a battle group of their own to intervene, the Trasp were well positioned to dig in, especially in light of the composition of the force. This much metal hanging over our heads, too, Transom declared. They're not letting us out of here without getting what they came for. Bulldog began speaking with Carolina and the Tuataran majors about how he might surrender himself in such a way that his family and the crew of the Yankee Chaos could sneak off Theta Nikorla unscathed. The main problem in his mind was proximity. Wherever he appeared on the landscape, the Trasp were certain to canvass with increased scrutiny. Mycon quietly pulled Carolina aside to relay another possibility. I wanted to discuss this with you, Carolina, before telling Acop Hernan or the rest of the crew, but there may be a way for everyone to escape. If the Trasp want Bulldog Hernan, we give them Bulldog Hernan.
What do you mean, Mycon?
The Prime AI paused, exhibiting a look of concern, as though distracted. One moment, Captain. I am tracking an anomalous signal heading out from Nikorla. It seems to be coming our way.
One of the Trasp drones?
He shook his head. Not a drone. Not even Trasp.
Then what?
It is the Yankee Chaos herself.
How? If you're not flying it, who is?
I would bet on the Trasp, Captain Dreesen. Somehow they must have tied some communications trail to us here. A tag in one of the bags. A piece of Socia's hardware, perhaps. My body, maybe. Perhaps they've cracked my clone's encryption. I'm not sure. Transom gave a hand signal to Bulldog and Fieldstone, and they began ushering members of their party unsuited to combat to the ship. The children, the doctor, and Bulldog's daughters. Soch took up a position halfway to the tube's exit, while Drya took up a position with Bulldog behind the forward fighters. They had a plan in place, of course, these warriors, for a last-ditch defense of the tunnel. It's flying funny, Mycon stated to Carolina, as though hobbled.
The YC?
Yes, listing. Now taking an obscure flight path directly toward this position.
What do you make of it, Mycon?
I don't know what to make of it. The only reasons the ship would be flying thus is if it took damage in the incursion, or the pilot wanted to give the perception that the ship were damaged. The familiar sound of the Yankee Chaos's engines began to quietly creep down the lava tube, growing slowly louder as the seconds passed. Whoever is in our ship, they know we're here, Mycon stated. They've touched down now at the lava tube's entrance. Transom and Fieldstone looked over at Mycon and Carolina from their positions, gesturing as though to inquire what might be coming down the tunnel. Mycon Prime shook his head and ushered Carolina back toward the Hernan ship, making clear they didn't know. For nearly a minute, a tension hung in that dim cavern as the faint humming wheeze of their own engine echoed down the jagged rock corridor. Then, suddenly, a voice. Would you believe it? Some damn idiot abandoned a perfectly good spaceship out on the lava flats back there. I can't imagine who would do such a thing. Wren came bursting out the lowered back gate of Hernan's ship. Birch! She shouted, rushing up toward the tube's exit. To Carolina's ears, the familiar voice did sound like him, but under the circumstances, she wasn't nearly as certain as the doctor. She thought her ears might have deceived her, until she could see Birch's familiar profile against the dark backdrop of the tunnel ahead. Doctor! Transom shouted, trying to catch her attention, exhorting her to take caution. But she didn't listen or slow down. Wren knew it wasn't a trick. That, or she didn't care if it was somehow a Trasp trap. She wouldn't be deterred from walking into it. Birch, too, came further into the tunnel, walking casually, approaching as though meeting friends, as though he knew exactly what to expect at the bottom of that tunnel. It is his voice, Mycon stated. A perfect acoustic match. Carolina let down her guard and began to walk toward their old captain. Instead of combat, she found a gathering of old friends up that tunnel. Soch embracing Birch the moment Wren let him go. Even Transom had a grin on his face as they shook hands. Heard stories, Fieldstone stated. You look about right. Speaking of stories, Birch said, wish we had time for them, because we sure have our share of them on our end. The situation's a little prickly, though, and I imagine you'll want to get Bulldog and his family out.
How do you...
Carolina began to ask. Hello, Captain, Birch said, stepping forward and embracing her. That'd be part of the story.
And how did you get past the Trasp?
The answer to all questions is either we are extraordinarily lucky, We're Trasp ourselves? We know the future? Or maybe all of the above?
Birch, you said we, Carolina asked. Who's flying the ship?
Who else? Only the best pilot in the galaxy. Now, we've got a plan, but it's going to require everyone to act fast, be cool, and trust me. I figure you can all handle that much. That's what we do, Soch said. Just give the orders, boss.
The crew of the Yankee Chaos quickly said their goodbyes to the Hernans, with the longest goodbye, including a list of instructions from Ren to Medua on Hosman's continued care, followed by a long bear hug. When the young mother released Ren, Birch led the way back to the Yankee Chaos. Once aboard, Birch and Carolina stood at the head of the table while the others got settled in the atrium. Birch was clear. They needed to be cool. Everyone needed to be cool. Whatever happened, they couldn't make the first move no matter what. He made Soch and Transom promise.
This guy I don't know,
Birch said, eyeing Fieldstone.
A Terran too by the sound of you. Can you be cool? Cooler than those two, Field said, gesturing towards Soch and Transom. That's not a high bar when it comes to the Trasp, Birch said. But I'll take it. What about you? Drya, was it?
That's right, Birch. We've heard some fun stories about you.
I'm sure you have. Is the next story they tell about this crew going to involve you being calm in the next 15 minutes, Drya?
You know I'm the coolest one here.
Damn, it's good to see you all, Birch said, smiling. Okay, strap in, everybody. Ship?
Is she on the flight deck? Ren asked. Or is she back in the ship? I'm right here, Rishi stated, stepping into the atrium. Hi, everybody. I can't wait to catch up with you all. I just wanted to warn you to hold tight. I need to make this a bit of a rough ride. It's all for show, though, don't worry.
Rishi and Birch retreated to the flight deck as Carolina sat at the head of the table and strapped in, winking to Bulldog, who was seated at the other end of the table, quietly taking in the scene. What do you think, old man? Transom asked, grinning. I'm still skeptical, the old Terran war chief answered. But we lack better options, to be sure. The ship lifted off in a jump, sputtering upward and lurching. Then it listed to the right as it climbed. Suddenly the ship dropped, righted itself, and then began to climb again. Yankee Chaos, you're listing dangerously. A voice came over the atrium comms channel, patched through by Rishi. Is that a fact? Birch responded. Could be that's just how we fly out here, Captain. You know, a little wonky and unconventional. Please sit down and await assistance. I'll send out our technical unit. You know, Captain, I'd much prefer if you came yourself. I'm pretty sure the scans your units ran are responsible for the bug in our telemetry in the first place. It's causing hell. We're responsible, Captain Birch? Who knows what state that ship was in when it was abandoned there? It didn't drop out of the sky, son, Birch replied. OSTP, you have something better to do right now? I'm asking as a friend. Transom, Soch, and Fieldstone all looked at each other. That call sign was unmistakably Trasp, and here was Birch, asking as a friend. Very well, Yankee Chaos. I'll be right out. Set her down softly, Helicon. Power down your engines, and I'll escort the tech units personally. Many thanks, Captain. We'll await your approach. Helicon, Transom said, looking over at Carolina. She shook her head, shrugging. Anybody? Everyone looked perplexed. Rishi's voice came over the comms channel from the flight deck. We had to fake a malfunction as a pretext to set down over the lava shaft and pick you guys up. I'm confused, Ren said. Carolina looked over, sharing an equally confused look with the doctor. Trust Birch and Rishi, I guess. Brace everyone, Rishi warned. We're landing. The ship, which had been bouncing, listing, and righting itself, now slowed to a near hover and suddenly bounced off the ground and thudded to a stop. A hard touchdown. Birch and Rishi emerged from the flight deck after a moment. Okay, Birch said. Just so nobody freaks out when it happens. We're going to have to abduct this Trasp captain so Rishi can take his place and turn in Bulldog. Touching down, Helicon. The voice of the Trasp captain echoed through the atrium. On your 3 o'clock now. I have 2 service bots on the way. Wave them off, Omar, Birch said. They won't be needed. I found the source of the problem.
Do you still need my assistance?
Please, affirmative.
All right, I'll be right over, the Trasp captain replied.
You're on a first-name basis with the Trasp OC here, Birch? Transom asked.
You didn't tell them?
Rishi asked. Didn't I? Birch said.
It wouldn't seem so, love.
Oh, well, you tell them. I'll go let Omar in. Birch left the atrium, headed for the rear airlock.
The Trasp captain is Omar Jamai,
Rishi said.
He's Lita's younger brother.
Lita's brother? Ren said, wide-eyed. What are the odds of that? Soch said. Rishi shook her head.
Yeah, not good. Impossibly small, actually. I'm not 100% sure, but we figured Nelius must have had something to do with that.
Nelius? Carolina said.
Rishi, what the hell is going on?
Do you two have any idea of the forces you're meddling with? The voice of the old Ateran war chief bellowed.
Far better than you, I'd wager. Now shut it and be a good bulldog, and you can take it up with him yourself in a couple days.
Birch's voice could be heard echoing into the atrium from the back of the ship. Shh, Rishi insisted, staring over at Transom and Soch.
Just nobody touches Omar or they deal with me.
I don't even know who to start killing, Transom said, under his breath. Carolina shot Transom an angry look, just as Birch stepped back into the atrium. Beside him was Omar Jamai. Omar's face immediately went blank when he saw the collection of people there staring back at him. He looked over at Birch. You picked up a few passengers, I see, Captain Birch. Omar began to step around the table, examining each face. He was clearly surprised, if not outright shocked, by the large company assembled in the Yankee Chaos's atrium. You have our target, Omar said, staring at the old Ateran war chief at the end of the table. Birch flashed Omar a reassuring look. Yeah, I'm not sure how much Aida has told you. Oh, quite a bit, Omar said, taking a deep breath as he examined the room, looking up at the atrium window and then back down at the table. I've heard some tales of this crew that were difficult to believe. All true, Birch said. I think. They were good, right? Omar smiled. What's the angle here, Birch? I have enough metal hovering over this planet to turn this situation very nasty, very fast. You don't want that, though. Not for yourself. Not for Aida's friends. Were you harboring my target, Helicon? No. Just trying to exfiltrate him. And keep the Protectorate from killing all my friends here. Are you planning on holding me hostage, Captain Birch? Call it an invitation, Omar. I put my life in your hands once before, and you rewarded my trust. Allow me to repay you in kind. I do have a duty here, though. The Protectorate intends to interrogate that man. Omar fixed his gaze on Bulldog Hernan. You aren't exactly in a good position to press the issue. Point stipulated, Omar stated, his eyes settling on Transom as he circled the table. How to untangle this knot you've tied us in, though, Helicon. You come with us of your own free will, our guest, and Rishi turns over Bulldog to your division. And why would they not shoot her to 1,000 pieces on sight?
Did Aida tell you that story?
Rishi asked, stepping toward Omar.
I can take your shape.
She mentioned that. Omar stepped back as Rishi got within arm's reach. Oh, you can take my shape? Rishi nodded.
Is it okay?
Omar didn't protest, neither stepping forward nor avoiding Rishi's hand as she reached up to touch his face. She slowly began to grow taller, her hair and skin gradually growing darker as her features broadened and began to resemble Omar Jamai.
Whoa,
Ren stated.
That is freaky.
Omar stared back at himself in disbelief. That's me. No, it's me, Rishi said back in his own voice. I'm with you, Doctor, Omar said. Whoa. Rishi's going to take him in, Birch stated. I think it might be best if you called it in first, though. Then we'd sure appreciate it if you got all that metal off our heads, Omar. And then what, Birch? Then you come with us for a bit. How long is she going to impersonate me? Not long, Birch said. Probably not that long at all. Omar looked at Rishi again, and then down at everyone seated at the atrium table. Well, Aida wasn't lying, Omar said, shaking his head. You people really are crazy. Come on, Bulldog, Rishi said, turning toward the end of the table. Woof, woof, the old man stated as he stood. Welcome to the family, Omar, Birch stated. See you soon, love, Rishi said, drawing funny looks as everyone processed the dissonance of Rishi's voice escaping that second Omar's mouth. I bet this was not how you saw your day going, Carolina asked him. Omar turned, seeming to notice her for the first time. Us too, if it's any consolation. You're Carolina Dreesen. And yes, no. He put his hand to his chest. Omar Jamai, pleasure to meet you. He seemed to stand there in shock and disbelief for a moment, before suddenly, Soch burst into laughter at the befuddled sight of him. Welcome to the Yankee Chaos, Omar, Birch said. I'd tell you it'll get easier to make sense of things around here, but I'm still waiting for that to kick in myself. So what the hell have you been up to, Birch? Transom asked. Cage fighting? Wizard wrangling? Pissing off a race of super-intelligent AIs 2 million years in the future? I heard you went to Athos. As Rishi and Bulldog made their way to Omar's ship, the crew listened in as Omar relayed his capture of Akop back to his division. It was a very small contingent of human officers, 2 lieutenants, with 4 fleet operators and tactical ground directors apiece working under them. They were all young and inexperienced. Omar gave the command to recall the drones and strikers, to make an ordered tactical extraction of all Trasp assets, and to bring Akop back to Protectorate space. Then, Rishi pulled his comms line. I suppose at the very least, I won't be accounted a traitor, Omar said once he'd signed off. And my doppelganger will get credit for capturing our target. The comment was met by a long silence. Omar, who had taken Bulldog's seat at the end of the atrium table, looked around as the crew exchanged looks. What?
Yeah, sorry, Omar,
Ren said.
That was never happening. You're going to let that old man and his family go.
I don't understand. That was not Akop with Rishi just now?
That was Mycon Prime, Carolina stated. We'd ask for your patience, Captain Jamai. I'm sure if you've heard your sister's stories, you're aware you've just taken your first steps down a deep rabbit hole.
Birch stepped back into the atrium. He'd been poking around the back at Rishi's direction, getting the ship ready for takeoff again. I've never once seen a rabbit down this hole yet, Birch said. Hang on, everyone. We'll be taking off in a minute. Who's flying this bucket? Transom asked. You're no pilot, Birch. Rishi programmed the autopilot. Plus, we figured you and your Terran friend could step in a pinch if need be.
I'm a pilot too,
Drya added. Great. 3 pilots.
Where are we headed, Birch?
Tau Nera.
What's out there?
Ren asked. Maybe about 1 million more questions. How about you all just sit tight or we'll never get there? Carolina smiled, turning her head back toward the group gathered at the table. Birch headed toward the flight deck.
How's Lida?
Ren asked Omar before catching herself.
Your sister.
The ship hummed and slowly began to rise and then accelerate. It was quite an adjustment for her at first, he replied once the hum of the engine steadied. Helicon could tell you all about that.
Helicon?
Carolina asked. That is Captain Birch's name, isn't it? Transom and Soch started laughing.
It's Hale, actually,
Ren stated. Ah, Omar said. A cover ID for the Protectorate. Good to know.
What kind of a name is Helicon?
Ren asked. A Trasp name, Transom barked, his eyes heavy on Omar's uniform.
Your sister,
Ren said, trying to break the tension.
How's she doing? We miss her.
She misses you. Truth be told, my sister never came home, Doctor. Your Lida did. That was very hard for me. She was the person you know, only she wasn't ours anymore, if that makes sense. When she returned to us, she had changed.
How so?
Aida was a fighter, a tremendous fighter, with an unconquerable spirit. When we were children, I adored that about her. And when she joined the military, that natural spirit in her was charged, singularly focused toward that aim, to the protectorate, to victory. It wasn't obligatory or part of the duty of her vows, as it is with so many of us. So many of yours, I imagine, too. Omar looked down the other end of the table, toward Fieldstone and Transome. Aida Jamai meant it.
And when she came back?
She hated the protectorate. She was angry and cynical. What she told me of her injuries was difficult to hear, Doctor.
I met her after her recovery, but I had her records forwarded from Tresia and from the Semistratum.
Wren shook her head.
She should have died many times over.
That's Aida, Omar said, taking a deep breath. Burnt to her bones, her identity erased, her face entirely reconstructed. But at her core, the fighter was still there. And I thought, oh, she just has it all wrong. Aida hates the protectorate today because for years she believed we were the ones who'd hit Kendry, who'd done that to her. In my mind, I believed that if I convinced Aida of the reality that it was the Eterans who destroyed Kendry, had burned her flesh and taken her memory, then I'd get my sister back. Maybe she wouldn't remember everything again, but at least she would be able to identify with us, be on the right side again. So I showed my sister the mission reports, the intelligence briefings, even the public-facing news reports of what had happened, all of it proving beyond any doubt that Eteris was responsible for her injuries. She said, Omar, you just don't get it. I hope someday you will. The war will never be over for me until the very idea of using a nuke on the heads of human beings becomes impossible to fathom to all of humanity, Trasp, the Terran, or anybody else. So you see, the Aida Jamai I knew from our childhood never came home. But I do believe my sister did, after all, that last piece of her, that fight. It's still in her. That's how Lita is doing, Doctor. And I'm so very grateful to all of you for the role you played in helping her recover. Carolina smiled.
I think she'd be proud of what you've done today, Omar.
No, I don't think so, Ms. Dreesen. Respectfully. Not yet. Omar glared over at Transome. Do you know what we call him? That man sitting beside you, Ms. Dreesen? Major Sebastian Pollock is his real name, if memory serves me correctly. It does, Transome stated.
What do the Trasp call him?
Carolina asked.
I don't know.
We usually just shout, hey asshole, Soch joked, trying to ease the tension a little. We call him the Eteran Reaper, Omar said. I bet he doesn't even know how many people in this very uniform he's killed, wearing these colors. Omar pointed to his chest. A lot, Transome said, without a hint of regret in his tone or his face. Far too many to count. When my sister told me she met you, I had a hard time believing that my Aida had met this man from all the stories, and had lived to tell about it. You'd think maybe these war stories all get blown out of proportion, exaggerated, filled with hyperbole. So I suggested as much to her, and she says, no, Omar, the stories about him, the Reaper, they're real. They are, Transome agreed. Probably most of them are. Then she told me her story about you, Sebastian, that you stood toe-to-toe with the most notorious terrorist in the battery, and while taking bolts, you kicked her clean out of the line of fire, probably saving her life. There's no probably about it, Transome answered. The doctor sitting beside you, Birch, Rishi, Soch, your sister, they've all saved me one way or another. It's what you do for someone in your unit. It's no small thing, Omar said, shaking his head. Not for me. When the flight settles and the belts come off, it would be my honor to shake your hand, Major, for the part you played in bringing my sister back home. Transom glared back at Omar, and for a good 5 seconds of silence, he appeared to be deeply considering the proposition. A handshake with a Trasp captain. All right, he said. We can do that much for Lita. I just have one condition, Jamai. The second you take off that Trasp beret, I, too, would be honored to shake your hand. Metal. This has been an original story, written and read by P.E. Rowe. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this story. If you're enjoying the channel and you enjoyed today's story, I'd humbly ask that you leave a like on today's video, as it helps the channel to grow and reach more sci-fi fans like you. As I mentioned last week, if you tuned in, I'm going to be taking some time in the coming weeks for some channel-related development. So a story for next week, May 16th, is looking unlikely. It shouldn't be a super long hiatus, and hopefully I'll have some fun stuff to share in the next story, which should be along soon after that. In the meantime, please feel free to browse the entire catalog here on the channel if you're missing the weeklies. Also keep your eyes out for a topic poll on the community page for next month in the coming days as well. If you'd like to help out the channel by supporting, there are links in this video's description to my support page. You can also help out by sharing this and other stories from the channel, or purchasing a collection in paperback, ebook, or audiobook for yourself or a sci-fi fan you know is always a huge help as well. I'm so grateful to you for listening. It's a joy to share my work with you here, and I can't wait to be back with more soon. Thanks for listening. This has been P.E. Rowe, and we'll see you next time.